Hello, everyone. Welcome to the live stream. We are live. Now, this is the pre-show to my Security Plus study group. If you're watching this on the replay, you can fast forward about 10 minutes and we'll get started. For those of you that are here live, well, there's no fast forward for you. You're stuck with me. We're an hour late, aren't we? Well, actually, we're right on time. We scheduled this an hour later than normal. So if you've been hanging out, hello, chat room. Some of you did get here relatively early. Sorry about that. I had all kinds of things happening today. We weren't supposed to have a study group at all today. This was supposed to happen last week, but last week was pushed because we had to move up Network Plus study group to last week because of the Hurricane Michael that came through. So, but here we are. Now we're here. The problem is that I scheduled things for this morning to do that could not be moved, and it would have conflicted with the study group time. It was just a big thing. So I appreciate everyone's flexibility with the times. I'm sorry for moving all of those things around, but here we are. Plus, all replays are always there, so you've always got that going for you. Let's check things. We already recorded the podcast intro. You missed that part. It was great. Sorry you missed it. There I am. Hi, everybody. Hi. Nice to see you. Camera 2's working. Camera 3 is working. And camera 4, let's put something up so you can at least see camera 4. There's camera 4. So that all works. It's alive. Hello, thank you, welcome. Let's change the website front end. That would be good. Did I put it somewhere? Did I close it? Dag nabbit. I closed it. Let's pull up all of this nonsense in my YouTube history. That's not going to work. Let's go then to a bookmark. There we are. There we go. Let's now change top of the site to say that it's live with the link to the live piece and get all of that going. It's a good day for a study group, though. Turns out I'm going to have an extra week at the end of this month anyway, because it's a month with 5 weeks in it. So pushing it 1 week still gives me an extra week at the end. Okay, we're going to keep this going till 2. My Security Plus study group is live. Live? How about live right now? Join us here and then /live. How about click here to join? That makes more sense. And let's reset the cookie. And in case somebody had closed it out, hidden it, that will unhide it, and we'll save those changes. And that gets that going. Excellent. Okay, next on our list, hello, chat room. Welcome. I see DC and Tennessee have checked in already. East Coast is here. West Coast is just waking up. Well, actually, now you're an hour later from waking up. You should be well woke at this point. I'm not sure that has the same meaning anymore. So Grayson from Alpha is checked in. Are you in Alpha, though, is the real question. Did you ever make it back there? It's a little crazy on that part of Florida. There's still a lot of work to be done from the hurricane damage. All right. What else do we got going on here? Brazil. There's a place I want to go. I wonder if that would be good, though. I wonder if I get in trouble if I went to Brazil. The answer is yes. MN, which I'm guessing is Minnesota. There's Miami. I used to live in Miami. Used to live in, my wife is born in Miami, raised in Hialeah. So that's a nice place to be. Alaska is here. Matt is here. Massachusetts. Worcester, checking in. Baston, not sure where that is. The no power. Oh, you have power, but no internet. Well, that's going to be a thing. Infrastructure is going to be an issue, isn't it? Getting that there. So that's welcome, Tennessee. This is one of those things, though. It's just going to take time to rebuild everything. Tallahassee, where the world headquarters is for Messer Studios, is in relatively good shape at this point. Internet's back up, power's back up. There are a few isolated areas where there are still problems. But I did drive up to Georgia this weekend, and there was still a huge amount of damage that has to be resolved, even up to Georgia, an hour from here, an hour north of here. So that's one of those things where I had always thought that I was far enough away from the coast in Tallahassee to avoid any of that. Live security plus, I got to type this right. So, well, the link where I will post questions you can answer is on the professormesser.com/live page. And if you are watching on YouTube, you'll notice there's no chat, and you'll wonder who are these people he is talking to. They are at professormesser.com/live, where there is a live chat and the instructions on how to get the Q&A. Plus, I'm going to give you those instructions once we get started. Study group. Let's type that in. There's the live link. Let's put it in the regular chat room so that people know I'm thinking about them. There we go. We got 4 minutes till we get started, so make yourself comfortable. Philly, the house. San Diego, welcome. Indianapolis is here. Indianapolis. Yes, Bluntstown is in bad shape. My family does have a house in Bluntstown, and we can't even get to it because so many trees are down. We can't get down the driveway to the house. People have been to the house, though. They climbed over trees. You know, it took like an hour to get to the house from the front of the road. So, welcome, Ireland. Delray. Sitting on a bench in Delray. Charlotte, North Carolina. Haven't been there in a while. I need to get back there. Welcome, Delhi, India. Arlington, Virginia is checking in. Kodiak, Alaska. See, now we're going to have to get the Mrs. Professor Messer keeps bugging me to get up to Alaska. We're going to have to do that. North Dakota is here. Welcome. This is one of those where I try to get at least the time frame for these live streams so that I can get as much of at least North America as possible, and hopefully as much as Europe as possible. India checking in. It must not, I don't even know what the time frame, the time of day is in India, but thank you for joining us. Nigeria is here. Welcome. Cary, North Carolina. It's where we got to get out. See some of these places, or get back to some of these places. How much would I say I would spend on my whole setup if I don't mind? Let's see. If I had to count up right now, how much is sitting in front of me? About $50,000. About dollars, US dollars. Yes, that's about right. That's retail cost plus or minus. And it's a little bit of overkill, but you sort of need. I started with an investment of about $2,500. So the very first setup I ever used was a laptop, a set of lights that you'd use, halogen lights you'd use in your garage, and a camera bought at Walmart, that kind of camera, and it worked great. For the time, it was great. It recorded to tape. Once you recorded, the tape had to be digitized and put onto the laptop. The laptop wasn't great for editing, but we figured it out. You just take times. So it's one of those things. Any chance of doing the live sessions at a different time? Well, we used to do them on weekends around noon. I've considered doing them at different times of the day, yes, but the problem is that there's no time that works for everybody. So it's hard for me. I try to pick one where I can at least get North America, or at least the time zones associated with North America in there, so folks from Brazil and South America can join as well, and up in Canada. So I try to fit those in, and then it's difficult going outside of that because I still have to do things here. There's my schedule and the things we're doing. And quite honestly, 12 noon, 1 o'clock in the afternoons when we're doing this one, it does become more of an issue, but it works out. I'm open for suggestions. I think weekends had a benefit. I used to do them on the weekend. Now we don't, but I'm open for recommendations. At this point, though, It's time to get started. So let's do a study group, everybody. Here we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the October 2018 Professor Messer Security Plus study group, coming to you live from the world headquarters of Messer Studios here in Tallahassee, Florida. Thank you for joining us. My name is James Messer. I will be your host for this next hour of questions and answers that come directly from the Security Plus exam created by CompTIA. This would be the SY0501 exam. We've got plenty of questions to go through. I need to set up a few extra things on my screen so I can see what's going on. I was so busy talking to the chat room earlier that I probably should have spent more time prepping. But here we are anyway. That's the beauty of a live show. Thanks for joining us. We're able to bring this show to you thanks to your ongoing support. So those of you that have seen my course before, my entire Security Plus training course is available for you to watch absolutely free online every minute of every video. This isn't one where you even have to register. I don't take your email address. I don't ask you to log in. You just go online and there it is. You can find all of that at professormesser.com. This information and the things we're going to go through are all bundled together. They come directly from these videos. Some people watch these videos online. Some people like to have an offline version of this. So I do sell an offline version, both in a digital and a physical form. I also have audio versions of this available, MP3s, that you can put on your mobile device and listen to this on the way to work or while you're working out. And my course notes. We'll talk more about the course notes in a bit, but they go a long way to keeping the lights on. And thank you so much for your ongoing support there. Find out all about these at professormesser.com/GetSecPlus. There's also, of course, things always going on here at Messer Studios. You can follow what's happening on Twitter by going to professormesser.com/Twitter. And perhaps more important, for some odd reason, having subscribers on YouTube is a pretty important thing. You always hear people talking about, please subscribe to my channel. And the reason that we're always asking you to do that is because YouTube watches these subscriptions and they will provide additional support. They'll provide someone we can talk with back at YouTube headquarters. It's a nice thing to have. If you you can do this, if you can subscribe, visit our YouTube page, professormesser.com/YouTube. I really do appreciate it. There is also a version of this live stream available afterwards that you can watch the video version. Some of you, though, just want an audio version of this. So there is a podcast available of this at professormesser.com/podcast, where you can download my A+ Network Plus Security Plus study groups and the after show. I separate them out so you can download all of these. And we also have links if you're on another service. If you're on the Google Audio service, podcast service, if you're on Spotify, just simply search for Professor Messer and that will be there as well. Today we're going to talk about all the things you need to know from the Security Plus certification. All the questions today come directly from the SY0501 exam objectives. This is a version of the Security Plus exam that was released on October the 4th, 2017. So it's been around for just a little bit now. We've got still even a couple years we have before we even see a new version of this ever coming up. So if you're studying for your SY0501, you've got the right version. This is the one you should be using. It's a single exam you have to pass. That single exam could give you as many as 90 questions in a 90-minute period. So make sure that you know exactly the time frames are when you're taking this exam. The passing score is a 750 on a range of 100 to 900. So we never know exactly how these things are graded. We know that every question has a different number of points. The best idea is that you simply do the best you can. You're going to get a series of multiple choice questions on this exam, but there's a handful of questions you'll get right at the beginning of the exam that are not multiple choice questions. These questions are performance-based questions. That's what CompTIA calls them. And they are anything but multiple choice. They might be fill in the blank. They might be putting you at a command prompt and asking you to perform a function. It might be a drag and drop. It might be a matching. It might be putting things in a particular order. You never know exactly what you're going to get. We have a performance-based question for you today, so stick around to that. You can absolutely have a look at that. You, though, are going to be answering the questions if you are here watching this live. If you're watching this on the replay, you don't have a way to to answer these questions live. You have to be here for the actual show. You can always hit the calendar on my website to find out when the next live event is going to be. So if you are here live, you can pop open a new browser window and visit professormesser.com/QA. And that is going to get you to Socrative. It's a third-party service I use where I've posted the questions, and then I can watch as you are answering the questions. There they are. Socrative also has a student app that you can download to your mobile device. The student app may ask you for a room name. That room name is Professor Messer, PROFESSORMESSER, all one word. Make sure you spell it right, and you'll be in to see the questions as well. In fact, I have a question from last month up. We call this our rewind question to see if you're able to get into Socrative, if everything is working properly. And the question is, a company has added a handprint reader to the data center entrance. Which of these would best describe this authentication method? And I've given you some multiple choice options. The first option is something you do, something you know, somewhere you are, something you are, or something you have. So there's your 5 options. And you can see, I can see in real time as you're answering these. I think a number of you may have been watching last week. Some of you may have already answered this one. You can see already that answer D, something you are, has gotten 78% of the vote. So somebody may be on to something there with the something you are. In fact, whenever you're dealing with biometrics, it is something you are. This is where you would have an iris scan, a fingerprint, a handprint, something that is associated with you. It's also something you can't change very easily since it's part of you. You can't really change your fingerprint very easily. You can't change your iris very easily. You can't change your handprint very easily. You can change it, but it's definitely not easy to change your handprint, and I'm not sure you would want to anyway. One of the options that was listed in here was one that talked about something you have. A lot of you answered something you have. Some said something you are, somewhere you are, and it wasn't either of those. Let's go through these real quick. Something you are, answer D, was the correct answer. Something you do is more like a signature. If somebody wants to check your signature, we're in the United States, we're voting soon. They always check your signature when you go to the voting place. And that's one way they check to see if that is something you do. Does that really match this other thing that you've done? And they're able to check those 2 things. Something you know would be something you've memorized, like a passphrase or a PIN number. That's redundant, but there you are. Somewhere you are is a location, a GPS location, or perhaps even an IP address, although that's not the best way to determine a geographical location. Somewhere you are, we already know we were at the data center entrance. The handprint reader was there. The handprint reader wasn't ever located any other place. So we really aren't checking to see where you are. We know where you are. You're in front of the data center door because you've got your hand in a handprint reader. So there's no question about that. So it would not be somewhere you are. And something you have would be something you have with you. If you have a token generator with you, or you have a token generator app that's on your mobile device, those are something you might have with you. Something you have is not the same thing as something you are. Whereas something you are is something that's physically you. Something you have is something that you could leave at home. If you have your access card, I'm always leaving my access card at home. That's something I have. So those are the things that we need to know about the Security Plus exam and this particular question dealing with the data center entrance and these particular authentication types. One of the questions I want to do, though, is one from the very beginning here. I want to do a performance-based question. This is something we do as our first question on every single study group. So you can always go back to our replays of study groups and look at the first question to get an example of what a good performance-based question might be. So I have a performance-based question for you today. This one is a matching question. This could also be maybe a drag and drop question if you were on the exam, but we don't have the functionality of drag and drop whenever we're working through these. So make sure that as you're going through and trying to figure out what do I type with this, we're just going to type it into a single view on the screen, a single blank on the screen. So it's sort of a fill in the blank on your screen as we go through Socrative, but it's really a matching question. Let's go to the question then. Here's the question for us, a performance-based question that asks, match the technology to the description. I'm going to match the technology to the description. And this is one where I have 5 different technologies and 5 different descriptions. So here are the 5 different technologies. Number 1 is diffusion. Number 2 is obfuscation. Number 3 is block cipher. Number 4 is ECC. And number 5 is symmetric encryption. Those are our 5 technologies. Now, here are the descriptions of these technologies. Description A is a single shared key. Description B is encrypt fixed length groups. Description C is variability in hash output. Description D is the process of making something unclear. And description E is asymmetric encryption using curves. So if you think these are already in the right order, that all of these technologies match the descriptions as they're listed, you can simply add to the online blank 1A, 2B, 3C, 4D, 5E, and you're done. Now, I will tell you that is not the case. They are not in that order. That's the only hint I will give you, and that's the only hint that any of us should be making on our screen. Make sure you remember what you put down when you put it into Socrative. Unfortunately, it doesn't show you what you've typed once you've put it in. So you may want to make a note of that as you're typing these things in, of what you chose between all of these different options. And of course, if you want to perform check these online, add these online, and continue with the questions, simply go to professormesser.com/QA. You can stay on that page, and it will automatically update itself as you go. These are certainly technologies you should be aware of. All 5 of these are listed in the CompTIA exam objectives. So if any of these look like a term that maybe you haven't run into before, I highly, highly, highly recommend that you download the latest exam objectives from CompTIA. Make sure you have your hands on those. Just go to the Google machine, type in CompTIA exam objectives, or go to professormesser.com/objectives. Of course, I've got an easy link that will send you over to the CompTIA website, so you can, of course, get your hands on those objectives. So hopefully now a number of you, now that you've Googled a few things, you're typing them in. I can see the results coming in live on my screen as we're going along, and you're putting them in exactly as we would hope, with the numbers and the letters, so you can figure these out. Yeah, and of course, in the chat room, people are saying, well, I guessed at it. I took a best shot at what this is. If you are on your actual exam, that is a very good strategy. Never, never, never leave a question blank on your exam. What we have been able to tell from CompTIA, they don't share their grading mechanisms, but what we have been able to tell is that if you don't answer a question correctly, you don't get any points, but you also don't lose points. So there's no penalty for guessing. And the best possible scenario is you guess and you get it right. That's fantastic. If you guess and get it wrong, there's nothing that is a negative associated with that. So make sure you always answer every question as much as you can, especially the multiple choice. Let's see how we did with this one. Let's step through these different technologies and see what the descriptions are. Technology 1 was diffusion. So diffusion is variability in hash output. We know that a good hash algorithm is always going to create something very different. Even if you only change one character in what you're hashing, the hash output should be dramatically different. There should be a lot of variability, and that certainly speaks to how well an algorithm is for doing hashing. So diffusion, number 1, matches C, variability in hash output. The technology 2 was obfuscation. To obfuscate something means that you're making it difficult to understand. You're making it unclear. The idea is to make it so confusing that you can't figure out what it is you're looking at. So obfuscation matches D, the process of making something unclear. We also have technology 3 was block cipher. Block cipher was almost a given because that matches B, encrypt fixed length groups. Block ciphers take a chunk of data, a fixed length chunk of data, and performs encryption and decryption to them. So block ciphers match encrypted fixed length groups. Technology 4 was ECC, and ECC is when we are using asymmetric encryption using curves. So this is one that does come in handy. It helps a lot on mobile devices that need some type of encryption that's not very overwhelming to the processor and memory of that device, and ECC encryption is one that does provide that. And the last is symmetric encryption, and that matches A, a single shared key. So that's one where we do have to know. Now you'll notice I wasn't asking you about any details, especially ones that are simple acronyms. The exam's not going to ask you what an acronym stands for. It's going to ask you what that acronym is used for. So if you see ECC on a Security Plus exam, they're probably talking about doing asymmetric encryption and using curves to make that happen. So make sure you're available. You know about that. It's something that's accessible to your mind, something that you can determine what something is based on that acronym that we use. And we do this in the security world all the time. We speak in acronyms, and we're hoping the person on the other side understands what we're talking about. Even if you don't know what the exact words are the acronym stand for, you know what it's used for. And that's the important part whenever you start working through those. So quickly, to summarize this, the answers are 1C, 2D, 3B, 4E, 5A. And that's the answer to today, this month's performance-based question for Security Plus. So hopefully some of you got all 5 right. Some of you got a couple wrong. It's one of those where you miss one, you've at least missed another. So make sure you're familiar with those. There's a lot more acronyms to know in Security Plus. Certainly make sure you're familiar with all of those. Let's do another question. Here's a question that asks, which of these would be the best placement of an SSL accelerator? Which of these would be the best placement of an SSL accelerator? Would it be A, between a client and their ISP? Would it be B, between a client and a web server? Would it be C, between ISP connections? Would it be D, between a web server and a database server? Or would it be E, between load balancers? So if you think you know the best placement of an SSL accelerator, don't answer in the chat room. We don't want any hints in the chat room that you can find at professormesser.com/live. You instead want to go to professormesser.com/QA and answer yourself. Where would be the best placement of an SSL accelerator? Maybe some of you have installed an SSL accelerator before, and if you have, this might be an easy one for you. If you haven't, well, then you may want to think that one through. The CompTIA exam objectives even say that you need to be familiar with where an SSL accelerator may be installed. That's one of the many different types of security technologies that you will use in your times when working with these. So make sure you're familiar with all of those, which would be the best placement of an SSL accelerator. Make sure you step through that. So those of you in the chat room wondering where the options go, where are they? You can always find them at professormesser.com/QA. That's where those options are. Make sure that you step through those so you can see where they are and what the different thing, and of course you want to answer. Go through the answer of those too as you're stepping through them. Some of you are stepping through all of these, trying to figure out the details, and good for you. I see the answers are coming in now. Let's go back to those and we can see exactly how you scored with this. Which would be the best placement of an SSL accelerator? How do we do? Well, 57% of you chose B, between a client and a web server. 20% of you, though, chose D, between a web server and a database server. And then you have almost a tie for third between E, between load balancers, and A, between a client and the ISP. And then last, at 5%, we have C, between ISP connections. So this is where, whenever you start working with these technologies, SSL accelerators are incredibly useful whenever you have these. In fact, you may choose to even implement them in very different ways, but the basic functionality is always going to be the same. With an SSL accelerator, one of the challenges we have is that any type of encryption, and especially when you're dealing with SSL, you're dealing with asymmetric encryption and symmetric encryption all simultaneously with many, many people all connecting together, trying to figure out all of those details. This is where you really have to think about with your web servers being overloaded with all of this encrypting and decrypting of data, let's offload that function onto something that is really focused on providing that as a very specific detail. So if you look at an SSL accelerator, we put it right in the middle between the client, which is someone using a browser. They're using Chrome, they're using Firefox, they're using Edge, they're using something on their workstation, and then they're communicating to a web server, but they're really communicating through an SSL accelerator. Very often they're communicating to the SSL accelerator, and the SSL accelerator is then proxying that communication on the back end. So the SSL accelerator often becomes even a load balancer, SSL accelerator all in one sometimes. This allows the SSL accelerator, which has hardware and it is built to do encryption and decryption. It handles the encryption and decryption. And on the back end, we've got HTTP in the clear very often between the SSL accelerator and the web server so that the web server can perform as fast as it can. And then of course, your client is getting information as fast as they can. So by distributing out the encryption versus the web hosting itself, you've now got a higher performing infrastructure. This becomes pretty useful to have that there. This is where, of course, you do get into a bit of a challenge when managing this. For example, here's our SSL accelerator. Between that SSL accelerator and the web server, now it's HTTP. It's all in the clear. So we do have to make sure that these two devices are very secure. We don't want somebody getting in the middle of that conversation because the only thing that's encrypted and protected is between the client or the browser and the SSL accelerator. Now, in the scenario where you're communicating to the Professor Messer website, I do have an SSL proxy, an SSL accelerator on the front end of this. But I have configured all of my communication to hit that accelerator and then provide a completely different secure channel on the back end. There's many different reasons for providing that proxy. The big one for me is performance and caching. But one of the nice things about this is that from the end to end in my network, everything is encrypted. Everything. And that's by design. Hardly anyone's going to do that unless you've got complete control of the data center. And that's not the scenario I have. I never know where the data is coming from, and I'm not sure where the data might be going to. But I know that all of your data from end to end is encrypted when it's coming into my network, which means that if you answered B between a client and a web server, 60% of you got that one absolutely right. Well done with all of those. We also, if we step through these others, 18% of you answered D between a web server and a database server. Between a web server and database server is usually a back-end process. You talk to the web server talks to the database server responds to the web server creates a page based on the information it receives and sends you information back to your browser. So the communication you're making to your web server is very different than the communication that's going on the back end between the web server and the database server. Very often, that's a very specific set of protocols that's usually database specific. So when you're connecting, for instance, to Professor Messer, I have a database server on the back end that's MySQL. And of course, you'll need to be able to send traffic to my web server, but you don't see the communication between the web server and the database server. They are, of course, encrypted. I make sure that traffic is encrypted, but it does not use SSL. So that's one where, in this particular scenario, an SSL accelerator doesn't make sense to have that there. There is, we have other options here between load balancers. We don't usually have load balancers talk directly to each other. And when they do, we're not placing an SSL accelerator there. We've got between a client and their ISP, there usually isn't an SSL endpoint there that you would use to put an SSL accelerator. And 4% said between ISP connections. Usually, if you need encryption between ISPs, it's being done using something like an IPsec tunnel. It would not be using an SSL accelerator to do that, especially since we would probably need end-to-end encryption in that scenario. The best answer here, really the only answer here, is indeed B, between a client and a web server. That's the best placement of an SSL accelerator. So 60% of you were spot on with that one. You got it absolutely right. Let's get another question in. Here's a question about access. And let me click next here so you can see it on your screens, where it asks, an access control device only allows access to devices that are located on a local campus and have been assigned a workstation certificate. What type of access control is in use? So this is one where you might even run into this. Possible options are A, rule-based, B, discretionary, C, mandatory, D, file system, or E, role-based. Those are the 5 access controls you have to choose from. The question asks, an access control device only allows access to devices that are located on a local campus and have been assigned a workstation certificate. What type of access control is in use? Is it rule-based, discretionary, mandatory, file system, or role-based? Those are your 5 options. If you think you know the answer, you go to professormesser.com/QA, and you can answer that particular question. This is one where you may even see this being used. This is a very common way to provide access so that you can really check to see if someone is here on the local campus, see if they have a certificate on their server. There's so many different things you can choose to set up for this. Make sure that you're aware of what mechanisms would be there. There's really, in this particular case, at least one particular option you would choose in this one. So this is one where if you're trying to set up a security control, you do need to understand what type of security control is in use here. And certainly all of these security controls that are listed are from the CompTIA exam objectives. So all of them are a little different in how they operate. You should be certainly aware of those and be able to work with those and have all of those available. This is where also, as you're going through the exam objectives, there's a lot of terminology in Security Plus. If you've already gone through Network Plus, you know there's a lot of acronyms. Network Plus is just full of acronyms. We certainly have a lot of acronyms in Security Plus, but you'll notice that the Security Plus exam goes a lot more into process and procedure. And this is certainly one of those process and procedure types of questions. So let's see how we did with this one. Here's our question again. I know my head kind of cuts it off there at the screen, but I'll read it for you. It says, an access control device only allows access to devices that are located on a local campus and have been assigned a workstation certificate. What type of access control is in use? And it's a mixed bag for us, isn't it? A, rule-based, received 41% of the vote. We have effectively a 3-way tie for second between B, discretionary, C, mandatory, and E, role-based. And only 5% chose D, file system, as the type of access control that's in use. Well, anytime that you're setting a specific type of rule to say these particular rules need to be in place before we're providing this level of access, then very often we're dealing with a rule-based access control. That is a very broad, generic term, but what it really means is that we have a series of checks that we're going to perform. We're going to check to see if you're local on the local network. Your IP address is our local network, therefore we know that you're local. Does the machine you're connecting with have a workstation certificate that has been signed by our certificate authority so that we can verify that it is one of our pieces of equipment? And if it does, then you've passed both of those rules and we can perform that particular access. We're usually checking an access control list for this. It might be a rule base in a firewall. It might be a rule base in an operating system. It might be a rule base in a device that's very specific to access control, like a VPN concentrator. So you've got a good example of this. There's a lab. This lab is only available between 9 and 5. Maybe it's only Chrome web browsers that are able to use this particular lab. So you can set up access controls that are very specific around these particular criteria, which might be the time of day, it might be a location, it might be a type of browser in use, it might be a type of software that's installed. There are all kinds of rules that you can set. And access controls are getting very smart about how they're able to check these things. So make sure you're familiar with all of those access controls as well. Whenever you start looking through, how am I going to find all these things in access controls? They're all in your exam objectives. So make sure you're familiar with that. So if you did answer A, rule-based, 44% of you got that one absolutely right. That is the type of access control that's listed there. Make sure you're familiar with all of that. Well, as I mentioned, the Security Plus exam is very broad. It goes into technical details of cryptography. It talks about information relating to access controls, and being able to handle different security events that might occur on your network. It is an enormous set of exam objectives. And as you've noticed in my videos, I provide graphics, text, charts. I provide as much information as I can to help you understand some of these very technical security topics. And I put all of this into one single book. This is my Security Plus course notes for the SY0501. So I've taken all the text from my videos, I've taken all the graphics, all of the tables, and I've put them into this study group. This is this course notes. This is a very easy way to step through. I've got the course notes here on my screen. This set of course notes, 95, 96 pages long. It's a big set of course notes. And this is in PDF format. So you can download it and you've got it right away. All the details of things that you might want. This comes directly from all of my videos. It steps through and is labeled for every single video. So you can, if you want to watch my video in section 1.2, Principles of Social Engineering, this is all the text from that video. If you go to my denial of service video, here's the example that I use for denial of service for an amplification attack. I even show you the graphic of how that amplification attack operates. And it just goes on and on through all of these pages of the Security Plus course notes. And this is a great way for you to hopefully get something for money that you might want to spend here. A lot of people say, I want to give you some money for these videos. Well, I don't accept any type of donations to the website. I want to give you something if you're going to be spending money. So these course notes are another way to keep things running here at the website. This is also available in a book form. Mrs. Professor Messer says you really need to have this on a paper form. So it's the exact same information, but instead of a PDF, it's of course in this Security Plus printed book onto dead trees. It's actually very nice. It's a perfect type of binding. They call it perfect binding. It doesn't have spirals on it. It's a very high quality paper, all in color. This is where you can, of course, there's some of the color. It's very hard to focus there. It's a great shot, isn't it? I should probably work on that. But it's also in a book form. And if you get the book, I ship it to you and you get the digital version for free. So as soon as you buy the book version, you can download the digital version and use that wherever you'd like as well. And of course, all of this is available on my site. You can find out more at professormesser.com/securitycn. This really does go a long way to keeping all of this running. I want to thank everyone for their ongoing support here. I really would not be able to do this without you. Thanks so much. I've got many more questions for you here. Let's get things reset on my screen so we can get to the next question. And this one, as I mentioned, Security Plus doesn't have a lot of acronyms, but they do have some. So here is one acronym. Here we go for this question that asks, which of the following would be the best way to determine the SLE? Which of the following would be the best way to determine the SLE? Would it be calculate the cost of events for an entire year? Would it be to calculate the cost of an event divided by the number of employees? Would it be to determine the cost of one event? Would it be determine how often an event will occur in a 12-month period? Or would it be to multiply the cost of a single event by the number of remote sites? This is what happens when I start typing these questions in very quickly late at night. They sometimes they'll sneak into the actual on-air video. So you've caught my mistyping already. So which of the following would be the best way to determine the SLE? Would it be to calculate the cost of events for an entire year, calculate the cost of an event divided by the number of employees, determine the cost of one event, determine how often an event will occur in a 12-month period, or multiply the cost of a single event by the number of remote sites? If you think you know the answer, go to professormesser.com/QA and you can answer that question. Hopefully that's one you're familiar with. A lot of you are already Googling SLE, which means you're looking at a very nice car. You're planning, and of course there's not only purchase, but leasing options available for your SLE. I hope you enjoy that. That's not the SLE we're talking about. We're talking about a very different SLE. So make sure you're familiar with which SLE we must be talking about when it comes to Security Plus. You're going to need to know that as you step through this. Which would be the best way? I'm going to take a sneak peek at how we're answering. I try to get this so that you're answering, that half of you know what this question is. I'm trying to make the questions hard enough so that 50% of you are going to get this right and, well, 50% of you are going to get this wrong. It wouldn't be any fun if all the questions were so easy that everybody got 100%. We need some way to break this down. And this is a really good example of the type of thought that CompTIA puts into a question. They're not going to ask you what SLE means. They're going to ask you to interpret the use of SLE. So that's the real important part of this question is knowing what that they're talking about, knowing what SLE means in this context, and then applying that knowledge to the answers that are available and see if you happen to know what those are. Let's see how we did with determining the SLE. And 41% here said determine the cost of one event. Answer C. We've got 27% answer D, determine how often an event will occur in a 12-month period. We've got 15% that said calculate the cost of events for an entire year. 12% said multiply the cost of a single event by the number of remote sites. And only 6% said B, calculate the cost of an event divided by the number of employees. Well, this is one we do need to know. This is absolutely not only from, this goes back to many different Security Plus versions. This is something that seems to be in all of the Security Plus exams, all of the objectives for the exam. It's always in there. You'll know what these things are. And in this particular case, we're talking about how we calculate and understand risk, not only in a type of how often this might occur, but also a dollar value associated with risk. Becomes important if you're planning to purchase security technologies that might mitigate this risk. Is the money that we're spending to mitigate this risk going to be higher or lower than the risk itself? This may be a case where we just decide we're going to accept the risk as it is and we'll just pay it out as it happens. Good example of this is when you're dealing with something like an ARO, which is an annualized rate of occurrence. For instance, how likely is it that a hurricane will hit? Well, this year, 100%. That's how likely it is. But it's very different if you live in Montana, where they don't get 100% of hurricanes every year. In Florida, we naturally think we're going to have hurricanes. We always have the batteries and the food and the water ready to go. So already we're making financial decisions even in our own homes based on an annualized rate of occurrence. But when a hurricane comes through, how much damage could it really cause? If someone steals a laptop, how much money does that really cost us? For instance, we might put a dollar value on a laptop of $1,000. And if somebody steals a laptop, then we're out $1,000. We've already backed up the data. We know the data's safe because we've encrypted it with full disk encryption. We're not worried about the data getting out there. We're worried about replacing the asset itself. And we're just putting a dollar value associated with it. And that is the SLE, the single loss expectancy. This is how much money it's going to cost us if we happen to have this event occur one single time. So when we're talking about an SLE, that's what we're talking about. And if we want to determine the SLE, we need to determine the cost of one event, which means the 44% of you that chose C, determine the cost of one event. That is the correct answer for an SLE. This single loss expectancy now helps you out because now you can take how often this occurs, its annualized rate of occurrence, multiply it times the single loss expectancy, and now we've got a value. So if we think that there are going to be 7 laptops stolen every year, we know based on our knowledge of how things happen that we're going to get about 7 laptops stolen a year on average. So if we know we're spending $1,000 every time that happens, that's a total ALE, or annual loss expectancy, of $7,000. So there's your good example of how you can use all of those different topics together and then make a decision. Do we create a tracking system for our laptops so we can track where they are? If that tracking system only costs us $2,000 and we're able to recover 3 laptops, then it's paid for itself. There's a good example of how you might use that and have the capability to make a business decision based on this very real security issue that you may run into. This is what security professionals deal with all the time because you have a budget. There's a certain amount of money you need to spend. Is it going to be worth it? And this is how you would do that. Let's do another question. I've got one here, right? There's got to be another question available. And this question is one where, let's see if I can get the question up on the screen itself so you can see it. Here it is. The question asks, which of these would be most associated with WPA2 Enterprise? Which of these would be most associated with WPA2 Enterprise? If you think you know this one, I've got a few options available. You may even know right off the top of your head what this one may be, but I've got a mix of different things you can go through. So let's see what the different options are. Is it A, LDAP? Is it B, TKIP? Is it C, WPS? Is it D, PGP? Is it E, 3DES? Whatever that is. I may not be saying that properly. Some of you may already know this. Which would be most associated with WPA2 Enterprise? Would it be LDAP, TKIP, WPS, PGP, or triple DES? There, I said it right. Just for you people that cringed when it's not said properly. So that's the question you have is dealing specifically with WPA2 Enterprise. If you think you know the answer, do not put the answer in the chat room. You want to go to professormesser.com/QA. Put the answer in right there. It's going to be there and available for you to watch. Maybe that's something you can, of course, recognize. Now, if you haven't done anything relating to WPA2 Enterprise, this may be one where we're doing the guessing. So make sure as you're going through this and trying to understand what should I be choosing here, make a guess. See if you get it right. Maybe get rid of the things you know it isn't. Then you'd be able to answer this question. It's one that you will find whenever you're dealing with this type of technology. There's many different sub pieces. There's many different building blocks that it could be. So we want to be able to break this out a little bit better and understand the details. Which of these would be most associated with WPA2 Enterprise? Let's see how we did. Back to the list. How do we do? We're not sure. We're all over the place. We are not aware of what we should be doing here. With 36% said TKIP, 25% said LDAP, 22% said WPS, 10% said triple DES, and 6% said PGP. Now, the real question here is we need to start with WPA2 Enterprise. We need to have a very good understanding of what WPA2 is, and most specifically, what WPA2 Enterprise is referring to. Well, those of you that are familiar with WPA, we know that that's the encryption we should be using on our wireless networks. Specifically, WPA2 is what you're going to find on most networks. WPA2 has a lot of different methods to allow us access to the network. We, of course, need this encryption key associated with WPA2, but we also need some way to authenticate to the network. If you're on a home network, you probably have a shared passphrase. You've put it into your wireless router, and anybody who comes to your house and they ask, hey, what's the passphrase for the wireless network? Oh, here's your passphrase. It's password 1. That's our passphrase. So that is called a pre-shared key, a PSK. And everybody has to have the pre-shared key to be able to access the network. When you're talking about an enterprise network, we're talking about something that you're using at work. There are many different people. There's people coming in and out throughout the day. And there's, of course, a need to make the network as secure as possible. There's employees that get hired all the time. There's employees that leave the organization all the time. And so we need some type of access control that provides us a stronger use of security than simply a shared passphrase. You'd have to change the shared passphrase every hour at places I've worked. That wouldn't work at all. So instead, we use WPA Enterprise or WPA2 Enterprise in the most current version of this. You may see this also referred to as WPA2 802.1x. In this scenario, we're not using a shared passphrase. We're using the username and password that we've been assigned to the network. Usually it's one associated with a Windows login. And you use that same username and password if you're logging into the VPN. Use that same username and password if you log into your desktop. You use the same username and password if you are connecting to the wireless network. This makes it very easy for you as an employee because you have your own username, your own password. Nobody else is sharing that. It doesn't ever change unless you change your password. And it's not one that anyone else would use. If there's no shared passphrase to get out into the world to cause any type of security issue on your network. Now, the problem, of course, is if you're typing in a username and password And this username and password has to be stored somewhere. It has to be stored on some type of name service, some type of database that can then check your username and password, make sure that it is correct. And the way that you usually have this is through this wireless access point communicating back to this name service over a protocol. Most commonly, that protocol is one that is, it might be TACACS, it might be Radius, or it might be LDAP. Those are the main protocols you will run into that provide that type of access to name services. So LDAP A is the correct answer in this case. That's the one that is most associated with WPA2 Enterprise. 24% of you chose LDAP. Why wouldn't it be TKIP? 39% chose TKIP. TKIP was a methodology used in the encryption for WPA, but not WPA2. WPA2 uses CCNP and uses AES. So inside of that, CCNP. So you've got different technologies for WPA2. TKIP, not part of WPA2, fortunately, because there are some vulnerabilities associated with TKIP. So I'm glad we're not using that anymore. If you were using WPA, that would apply, but WPA2 does not. WPS is an access control where you're using PIN numbers. I realize that's redundant, but there you are. Or in some cases, you get close to the router and you click a button and it provides you access to the wireless network. You would never see WPS used in an enterprise. There are known vulnerabilities associated with WPS, and it's not very practical. If you're in a conference room, you can't get up, go find the pin, or push a button that's next to the router. Most of the times, you don't have access to that router, so that's not going to happen either. 10% of you said triple DES. Triple DES is an encryption technology, but it's not used in WPA2 or WPA2 Enterprise. And PGP is a standalone asymmetric encryption algorithm. It's not one that's used in WPA2 or really any wireless technology either. So, of course, PGP is not going to apply as well. The only answer here could possibly be A, LDAP, WPA2 Enterprise, and LDAP go together. Anytime you see enterprise, you know there must be 802.1x. There must be a name lookup process. You're dealing with TACACS, you're dealing with Radius, you're dealing with LDAP. Those would be the most commonly associated technologies with WPA2 Enterprise. So this is one of those where only 24% of you got that one right, but that's the benefit, right? Now we know if we receive a question on the exam dealing with WPA2 Enterprise, we know exactly the types of technologies to expect, or perhaps which technologies not to expect to be associated with that. So well done, those of you that did answer A for LDAP. You got that one absolutely right. Now, by the way, if you are watching this study group and you'd like to get a continuing education unit credit, I can give you a 1 hour of webinar categorized CEU. So that's at least something you would have available. Those would be available only if you follow this process. And make sure you follow this process, and I will send you a digitally signed email that certifies that you must have watched this, because you're going to go to the top or the bottom of my site where it says Contact Us. You're going to click that. It's going to bring up a form where you will put your name, you will put your email address, and somewhere in the text body of that message, put that this is the October 2018 Security Plus study group. You can put anything else in there you'd like. I'm the one reading them, so if you want to put a note in there, you're welcome to put anything you'd like. And the term you want to use in that is LDAP. You want to put somewhere in that message the word LDAP, and then I will know you must have watched it at least up to this point, so I can give you credit for an hour, sure. But that will allow you to get that 1 hour CEU. I realize a number of you may not be collecting CEUs anymore. We know that CompTIA has their CertMaster CE. That kind of gets rid of all of those CEU requirements these days. But still, some of you are still collecting those, and I'm more than happy to give it to you. So make sure that you're doing that. Now, for those of you, you may have even sent me one last week. You'll notice I'm a little behind. I will get to them, hopefully today, maybe tonight. I get some of those CEUs sent out, but it's a manual process I go to. You don't get it immediately, so I will do that. So those of you, make sure you follow those instructions, and you'll know exactly how to make that happen. Some of you in the chat room are asking, so what email do we send it to? You don't send it to an email. You got to follow those instructions to make that happen. So make sure that you do that. It's going to be important that you are doing that, and because that is part of the certification process. So make sure you're aware of that. Let's do another question. As I bang the microphone, I apologize. Let's do another question that we go to and have all of those things there. I think it's also important that there is, of course, a replay available of this immediately after the event. So if you're ever going through this, you missed something, or you want to go through it again, make a note of the timestamp, and you're able to go back and find all of that information as well. So let's go to another question. I've got one here for you. This is a long one, so maybe we can all step through this one. And let me update it on your screen so you will see it there. And here's the question. A user is logged into their online banking service using HTTPS encryption with valid certificates. However, both the username and password are discovered a day later on a hacking site. Which of these attacks could have provided this information to the attackers? It's a pretty good question. So, which of these would it be? Would it be A, packet capture? Would it be B, keylogger? Would it be C, man in the middle? Would it be D, replay attack? Or would it be E, rogue access point? A user is logged into their online banking service using HTTPS encryption with valid certificates. However, both the username and password are discovered a day later on a hacking site. Which of these attacks could have provided this information to the attackers? Packet capture, keylogger, man in the middle, replay attack, or rogue access point? You think you know the answer? Go to professormesser.com/QA. You'll be able to answer this. The chat room, people are asking, are these questions always different for every live event? They are. I create a brand new set of questions for every live event. It takes about half a day to build all of those. But every time you go to a live event here, you're going to be getting a completely brand new set of questions every time. Otherwise, it'd be boring for me asking the same questions over and over. Nobody wants that. I think they're getting better as we go along too. Trying to get more of the flavor of the exam in these. So these are all written by me. You can tell when the misspellings show up. Clearly, I wrote this. And they are of course, all of these questions are bundled together. Can I group these previous questions into a nice practice test? Yes, I can. And the previous questions are available at professormesser.com/popquiz. I think it's popquiz /pop. Yes, popquiz, all one word. There you go. And it'll take you to an archive of the latest that come directly from these study groups. And I'm thinking of trying to find a way to implement and make it a little bit easier online to get access to these questions. I think having a good way to study these would be useful. I mean, we've already written the questions. Why not take advantage of them and have them available to you? So that would be a good one, good way to do it. So let's see what we think the answer is for this question. Users log into their online banking service using HTTPS encryption with valid certificates. However, both the username and password are discovered a day later on a hacking site. Which of these attacks could have provided this information to the attacker? You've only got 5 options available. Let's see how we did. 63% of you chose keylogger. 16% of you chose man in the middle. And then it's kind of a tie for third between replay attack, rogue access point, and packet capture. I think on this question, knowing what it could not be is almost more important than knowing what it could be. So that is one where, as we step through these, understanding if it could or could not be the correct answer becomes extremely important. So what would it be then? If we're connecting via HTTPS, all of the certificates are correct, everything is encrypted the way we would expect. How did somebody get a hold of that information? And they did it most likely from those 5 options. The only one that would provide this information is a keylogger. We're using HTTPS encryption, and we know the certificates are valid. We know it's an end-to-end encryption. This is the only way that someone would have been able to gain that information. So this is it's actually a very common way for people to gather usernames and passwords. Malware, botnets of many kinds take advantage of keyloggers to be able to watch when you log into your bank, grab that keylogged information, send it back to the mothership, and then they're able to take advantage of that. This is one where whatever you put into the keyboard all gets saved somewhere in a file and sent away. Becomes a challenge to be able to protect against this. Sometimes it's a software-based keylogger. Sometimes it's a hardware-based keylogger. There have been times where people have gone into a facility, actually plugged in a USB keylogger, and being able to watch what happens. So one of these situations, and we should probably look at this in the chat room, we'll go through why these particular questions were right, and perhaps more importantly, which of these answers, why they were wrong. So people are mentioning in the chat room, wait, man in the middle would have done this, but it would not have. So let's see why it would not have. So one of the things that we have here, 63% of us said keylogger, and that is the right answer. Keylogger is what we do. 17% of us said man in the middle. Now, in our particular case, I put very specifically into this question, they were using HTTPS encryption with valid certificates. The only way that anyone would be able to get a man in the middle is if some way you were able to get and create a certificate that said Bank of America, and they weren't actually communicating to Bank of America, which, by the way, would break all HTTPS encryption everywhere. There have been very, very small cases where someone was able to do this, but it was a breach at the certificate authority, or it was a vulnerability that was found in more of an offline in the lab scenario with the way that certificates were being used that we don't use any longer. So because man in the middle is not able to get into the middle without causing some type of certificate error, then it could not have been man in the middle. So this is one of those scenarios where it would not have happened. Replay attack, it's all encrypted data. We can't replay it. So that wouldn't have worked. 6% said rogue access point. Well, it doesn't even matter if you have a rogue access point because all of the communication between the client and the web server is all encrypted data. Even if we could see the data, we wouldn't be able to understand it, which also is why a packet capture would not be correct either. So the only possible option in here of anything that's in use today is keylogger. 63% said keylogger. That is the right answer associated with these. Make sure that if you're going through and trying to figure out which one of these things could it possibly be, that you're always looking at the best possible answer on the exam. And in our particular case, the 63% of you, well over 50%, were just spot on. You knew it had to be something like this. It had to be the keylogger, and you're correct. Man in the middle would not have worked. It would not have given you the information you needed. It would not have provided you with the details. I think we've got a few minutes left, so let's get another question in to really be able to answer this detail. Let's go through this next question. Another long one. This question, let me update your question on your side, asks, a security administrator would like a set of daily reports showing blocked attacks for the previous day from every IPS and firewall in their network. Which of these technologies would provide this functionality? Would it be A, proxy, B, load balancer, C, DLP, D, SIEM, or E, NAC? Security administrator would like a set of daily reports showing blocked attacks for the previous day from every IPS, every firewall in the network. Which of these technologies would provide this functionality? Would it be a proxy, a load balancer, DLP, SIEM, or NAC? If you know the answer, you go to professormesser.com/QA. You can put that answer in there. All of those technologies, by the way, are in the Security Plus exam objectives. So those are all real things. I didn't just make up a bunch of acronyms, put them together into words. No, those are real things. A DLP is a real thing, a SIEM is a real thing, a NAC is a real thing, a load balancer is a real thing, a proxy is a real thing. Those are all real things. So hopefully, you know what this one is. This one probably, if you were around, I will give you a hint. If you're around earlier in the other chat, you probably already know this. You probably already have this one. It's ingrained. You already know it. And some of you may have even implemented this technology. It's a very common request. I need to know what's going on in the network. I want some reports. I want to know every attack that was blocked yesterday for our entire network, which may be over a ton of different locations. I want to be able to do that. And I have worked with every single one of these technologies and had to implement them and make them work. How do we do, though? Well, 62% of you said SIEM. 18% of you said NAC. 11% said DLP. Folks, you love the acronyms on this one. Only 8% chose proxy. Only 1% chose load balancer, probably because we talked about a load balancer earlier. That was one where you already know what I was talking about, load balancer wise, and having those pieces there. That is 163% said SIEM. Is it really going to be SIEM? It is really the SIEM. A SIEM is our security information and event management console. It is where we send all of our logs from everything, from our firewalls, from our IPS, from our servers, from our switches, from our anything that has a log, from our routers, from our VPN concentrators. Everything that has a log inside of it, we send it into this massive database. So, of course, there's going to be terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of storage, just a huge amount of storage there to be able to have that. Hopefully, whenever you start working through and understanding all these details, this is one where I think that the SIEM can be a very handy thing. We were talking earlier in the general chat room on my website about different SIEM technologies, how they're implemented. I think that's one where it comes in handy. I have implemented tons of SIEMs. You can create tons of reports because now you've got a consolidated group of data. If anything happens on the network, you can really track IP addresses, someone logging into a VPN concentrator, what they're doing on a server, what rules that were hit on the firewall, put them all into a single report, and you've got all those details there. So those of you that did answer SIEM, you're spot on with that one. You were absolutely correct at having that particular piece of information available. Now, we do have other options here that weren't chosen. 16% said a network access control, a NAC. And a network access control is great for allowing or disallowing access to the network, a network access control. But that does not provide me with any way to show reports for blocked attacks. That's not what a NAC does. DLP is a data loss prevention device, being able to prevent someone from sending sensitive information over the network, from sending credit card numbers, from sending social security numbers in the clear. A DLP will watch for that and prevent it, but it does nothing with creating reports from every IPS or every firewall. So that's not going to work either. Proxy, 8% of you did say proxy. Proxy is very useful for being a middleman in communication, but it doesn't provide any reporting. It doesn't look at IPSs and provide you with daily reports of IPSs or firewalls. Doesn't do it. And finally, load balancer. 1% of you said load balancer. And we talked about load balancer earlier in the study group. We know it wasn't load balancer. Could not have been that. The only answer here, the best answer, the one that we're absolutely going to choose is indeed D, the SIEM. That is 64% of you that got that one. Absolutely correct. As I mentioned, all of these questions today came directly from the CompTIA exam objectives. You can download your copy of the exam objectives at professormesser.com/objectives. Make sure you get your hands on those. I do one of these Security Plus study groups every month. And after the study group, even today, I'm just going to open up the phone lines for general questions that can be about Security Plus or anything else. If you'd like to join us for this, you can always go to the professormesser.com/calendar and know when the next live event is going to be. The next Security Plus study group is on November the 21st, but I do have an A Plus study group on the 7th, and I have a Network Plus study group on the 14th, so you might even want to come back before then to do all of this. And of course, if you're watching this well after November the 21st and you're wondering when is the next event going to be, just go to professormesser.com/calendar and you can find all that information. Well, that ends our hour of Q&A. Stick around for the next hour. I have open phone lines. You can talk about anything you'd like, well, almost anything you'd like on the phone lines. I'm also taking questions from the chat room, so you don't have to call in. You can simply put in the chat room. I'm watching the things go by in the chat room right now. Don't forget about my course notes at professormesser.com/securitycn. Of course, you can subscribe, click the button, all of those things on the YouTube at professormesser.com/YouTube. We're on the Twitter at professormesser.com/Twitter, and Facebook. Just type in professormesser.com/ the type of social media you would like to hopefully find me on, and maybe I'll even be there. So that would be a great way to do it. So thank you for joining us. We could not do this without you. Thank you for your ongoing support. Thank you for your emails. It's great to have this level of support, and I will keep making these study groups, and we'll keep doing them as long as you keep showing up. Thank you for doing that. We will see you next time on the Security Plus study group. Well, we've got another hour of Q&A, so let me get that up and running. We'll at least get the phone lines. You can put questions in the chat room, by the way, by simply going to the chat and making that happen. I have to now figure out what buttons to push on my side to make these start up. And let's see, I'll turn this down so it doesn't make us a lot of noise as it's going through. There we go. And now I need to turn the Skypey. There it is. And let's call in to the Skypey. Call in. Call. There we go. And it says,
thank you for calling.
Well, you're welcome. You are so welcome that I am calling you. Let's type in. I think I'm typing this right. And it says,
enter your 6-digit.
Okay. That would be right. If I can remember my 6-digit PIN number. Maybe that's why I keep saying it now, is that she says PIN number, and now I say PIN number.
Welcome, host.
So maybe that's what it is I keep doing the same thing that she does. If you would like to call in and actually talk on a telephone, it's voice communication. You may have heard of it. You can call anywhere in the continental United States toll-free at 855-785-RJ45. You can also call on Skype anywhere in the world for free. No Skype minutes required. I'll pick up the tab on that one with a +1 at the beginning. +1 855-785-7545. You're welcome to call in, and I'll take questions from the chat room as well, so you don't have to call in at all. Just type questions there at professormesser.com/live, and I'll type those in as well. So plenty of those. People are asking me if I could send you a document today. I don't know what document you're asking about. So if you're talking about the course notes, as soon as you buy the course notes, they're available for download. So that's all automatic. It's automagic, and it works perfectly. So if you're interested in the course notes, and you're like, you put in your credit card number, you give me the Bitcoin, whatever it is, whatever mechanism you'd like to use, immediately downloadable. It's so quick and easy. That makes it very easy to have that there. So that is, if you're looking for that, then you'll have them in your hands. If you're planning to take the exam on Friday, you can start studying now. Have all of that content now to have that there. The CEU, you don't need the CEU information for your exam on Friday, so you couldn't have been talking about that. So other questions from the chat room. Some people are asking for things like things about the ticket granting process in Kerberos. Kerberos has this very involved process of tickets. It's primarily the way that Kerberos works. You'll notice in my 501 videos, I didn't go into the intricate details of the way that Kerberos operates with the ticket granting tickets and the ticket granting server and the digital signatures that are in place and the encryption that it uses and the timestamps. I cover it more at a broader level because CompTIA tends to cover it at a broader level. They weren't going into the detail that I was. But if you want to go back to my 401 course, it's available on YouTube. You can find that in my playlists. The Kerberos video there goes into that detail about step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. It's like an 8-step process to get authenticated with Kerberos. I don't go into that in my 501 video because CompTIA doesn't ask that of you. So I figure if they're not going to ask it of you, I'm not going to force you to memorize that. It's a balancing act we have when I'm creating the videos of how do I give you the information you need without giving you so much information that it's overwhelming. But I need to give you enough information so that you're able to add some context to what you're learning. So that is my balancing act. And in the 501 series, I got rid of that because it just didn't seem like CompTIA needed you to know that level of detail for Kerberos. In fact, most of the time, you don't need to know that level of detail for Kerberos. You need to know where your Kerberos server is, and you need to know that all your timestamps are right. Because one of the big problems with Kerberos, it has a very narrow window. I think it's a 5-minute window by default, that if you don't have that time set properly on your system, you're not going to get access to the network ever for those and have those pieces there. So that becomes very useful. Other questions people are asking. Let's see what we have here. Heuristic detection and anomaly-based detection. Because it seems like those are the same thing, but they really are very quite different in how they operate. Heuristic detection is one that a lot of security technology companies, if they deal with heuristics, they really promote it. Heuristics is one that is looking for particular things to happen. There's for instance, on a network, if somebody is accessing your computer and they perform a particular function that is a buffer overflow, there should be a way for software to recognize, whoa, that was just a buffer overflow attempt. I've never seen this buffer overflow attempt before, but I know what a buffer overflow attempt looks like. And even though I don't have a signature for this, I know enough about buffer overflows that that was a buffer overflow. It only happened one time. The day was going fine, and then all of a sudden, boom, there was that buffer overflow attempt. I think that's buffer overflow. I'm marking that. My heuristics tells me that that was a buffer overflow attempt. I'm blocking it right there, and I'm sending you log about it. So that is a heuristic. It's able to understand, even without a very specific signature, it understands broadly how this attack works, and it's able to stop the attack or at least identify it. The anomaly-based detection is one that requires what a normal day is like. It knows that if a certain type of traffic pattern is occurring on the network, there's SQL communication going back and forth. That SQL communication on a Wednesday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon always looks a certain way. But what if suddenly on next Wednesday at 2 o'clock, there was a huge spike in Microsoft SQL traffic that was authentication traffic? And that should fire some type of alarm. It wasn't an actual break-in. Nobody was able to get any data, but something was different. There was an anomaly. And because something was different, we had to have some time frame earlier that we could know what the normal was, and then finally understand what anomaly was based on that. So those are the two things you do need to know. They're very different in how they operate. It's almost easier to find an anomaly-based detection if you've been watching things over time. Heuristic detection just shows up. Your heuristics, if you've got really good heuristics, it'll catch it immediately. There's no waiting time. There's no find out what's normal with heuristics. Heuristics knows what's normal. It's going to tell you those. To have all of those things there becomes handy. To have that. How do you obtain the Security Plus 501 exam? You go to the CompTIA website and you register. CompTIA's got a whole section on there on how do I take this exam. They will break it down for you and show you everything you need to know to take that exam. They'll tell you where you can go in your area to take the exam. They'll tell you how much it will cost for you. There's plenty of details there to have all of those pieces available. So make sure that you're familiar with all of those things. That exam is going to all the process you have to go through to take that exam becomes pretty important there. Let's go back. Let's go to the phones. We can't go back to the phones. We've never gone there, but now we can go to the phones. Let's go to the 786 area code. Hello, caller. Thank you for calling in. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Professor. My name's Hassan. I'm calling from LA. How's it going?
Hey, welcome, Hassan. I think we've talked to you before.
Yes, we have. So I was just trying to set up snort.
Oh, excellent.
And so I don't know what I'm doing. Is there any, I am on their documentation page, and it just feels like it's going over my head.
Yep.
If you can just, guide me a little bit, that would be great.
In fact, one of the things that you're not alone, these applications like Snort. Snort, by the way, is a freely available to download and use intrusion detection and intrusion prevention software. Very, very commonly used. It is one that is very functional too. Has a lot of things that it can find, and because so many people use it, and a lot of these things are very open in how they operate, people share signatures all the time associated with Snort. And as I mentioned on other prior user groups, it would be great if you set up a lab in your house, that you are running some type of firewall like pfSense, that you installed an IPS like Snort, that you installed a number of these different technologies so that you yourself could try to see how it was to set it up, how it is to manage it, and see, in fact, if it's able to find any things that are on your network that maybe you didn't know was there. Now, I will tell you, one of the things you mentioned is that you're going through the documentation. It's like it's another language, and it really is. Especially because you're probably jumping into Snort. Snort very commonly runs in a Linux environment. That's how a lot of these tools are set up to run. And of course, a lot of the documentation is already assuming that you are very Linux savvy. in fact, not even very Linux savvy, that you're somewhat Linux savvy. The problem is that if you've never used or really delved into the intricacies of Linux, the documentation looks like it was written in a completely different language. What I would recommend for you, and I did this earlier, I'm not exactly sure where I found it, but I'm going to hunt around right now while we are on the phone, is I loaded a VM that was already pre-built with pfSense and snort in it. I set it up and ran it, and immediately everything was working. So I didn't have to do anything in particular. I'm looking for that particular VM that I used. I think I've got one that I have here. Maybe it's one of the packages from Snort that I grabbed. I'm not sure where I saw that. Maybe it was Netgate. Not exactly sure where I found that VM originally. I'm going to have to tweet that out later. But that was the way I set it up, because I didn't have to do any of the installation. I didn't have to compile the applications. I didn't have to create any hooks. I didn't have to make sure it was pointing to the right Ethernet adapter. I simply installed the virtual machine. I turned it on, and it was working. In fact, a lot of the videos for 501 that talk about firewalls and talk about IPSs came directly from that VM, because I didn't have to do much work at all to immediately start getting traffic to run through it. It was a very simple way to make that happen. So if I were you, I would try that, exactly that thing as well, and bring it up as a VM. Find that VM online somewhere. Somebody in the chat room is probably going to find it before I do, and see if you can get it running that way. That makes it very easy, very quick, and it makes it very simple to get a lab running and be able to have all this working without going through the details of Linux and configurations and configuration files or any of that, Hassan.
So what keywords should I look for?
Oh, that's a really good question, because I thought I would be able to find it by looking for pfSense and snort and a VM, and I didn't find it. Maybe virtual appliance, virtual appliance download. Let's see if the Google machine will be able to do that. Are there packages on the Snort website, which would be really nice to have all of those there. I don't see the virtual machines are immediately available for download. This is actually on the Netgate site, which has a hardware that you can buy. And I think this may be where I got the images of it as well on Netgate. It may not be. This was over a year ago when I did that. So this may be why I'm not able to find everything I need. There are some virtual machines out on SourceForge. That one's kind of sketchy to find those deals. Some people are on the chat room are also putting some ideas, some thoughts in there as well to find all of that. So maybe they'll be able to hunt one down, but there's got to be one out there somewhere. I know there is because I ran it.
Did you say Netgate or Netgear? I
said Netgate, which is a company that makes hardware that will run pfSense and Snort on it. And I want to say that they had a downloadable version and a VM that you could run too. I might be wrong. I'm trying to remember back in what I was doing to have that. But it was very easy. I just load up VirtualBox, or I had VMware Technologies here. I just loaded it up and off it went. It was very simple to get going. So if you can hunt that down, you're going to be in good shape.
Okay, cool. One more question. So I'm trying to set up a home lab. And is there any other recommendations that you would like to tell me in regards to setting up a home lab? First will be Snort. Anything else?
Well, one of the things that your home lab's probably going to have in is a lot of different kinds of technologies, not just security technologies, although having knowledge of pfSense is useful, having knowledge of Snort is useful, not necessarily because a lot of enterprises are running Snort and a lot of enterprises are running pfSense, because they're not. A lot of enterprises don't touch those because they need a higher performing appliance that's supported from a larger organization. So they're going to have big firewalls from big firewall companies. Usually they have IPSs built into them. But the technology that you learn, the fundamentals of configuring and set up a firewall are the same across many firewalls. The fundamentals of setting up and running an IPS are the same across many different IPSs. So knowing how to do that and run them is almost as important as doing any other IPS that's out there. You also want to have different technologies too, like might want to have a Windows server on your network because you're able to have an Active Directory database. That Active Directory database has a way that you can access it via LDAP. Other types of technologies might be a SIEM. You might want to have a SIEM running that could take all the logs from your pfSense and all the logs from your IPS, like snort, have all of those logs sent over to the SIEM so that you can create reports. There are other types of workstation technologies to have as well. So now we're starting to broaden the scope of this quite a bit. Having a database server on the network and a web server would give you at least some way and some foundation to set up other applications for monitoring, for sending logs, for doing reporting. So you almost always need some database server, and you always need a web server to go along with that. So those 4 or 5 or 6 things are kind of the fundamental core of almost every security environment that you're going to run into. Everybody's going to have a firewall. Everybody's going to have some type of content filtering or IPS. Everybody's going to want or have some type of reporting system. And you need to understand how to set those up on Linux, on Windows, and be able to have a database to store that data on. So if you get that much going, you're in pretty good shape. Come back to me then, and we'll have another set of 5 things to add on top of that. But those alone will take you quite some time to get going.
Okay, awesome. Any recommendations on a free SIEM anywhere?
There's a number of different SIEMs that you can run for free with a limited amount of bandwidth. And one that I mentioned earlier in the chat room, because it really is one of the best in the industry, is Splunk. Splunk has been around for many years. It is incredibly easy to get going, relatively speaking to what you've already seen, by the way. And you can run it for free as long as the amount of logs that you're sending to it are under a particular minimum size, which is perfect for a lab environment because you can get it running. And as long as you're not running, an enterprise configuration, you're in really good shape there. What you may find is when you register that people from Splunk may call you and they may say, "Hi, we're calling from Splunk. Are you interested?" You can tell them, "This is for a lab I'm running. I'm just trying to learn the technology. If you can point me in any direction, I'd love to learn more about your product." But just let them know. They'll just bug you. But just let them know, I'm not a good sales point for you. You don't have to call me for sales. I won't be buying anything. I'm trying to learn this stuff so I can use it later. And even Splunk is smart enough to know, oh, well, you might be buying this later on when you finally get into a job that does this. Let's send you some things you need. And they got plenty of resources on their website too. So that's not a quote unquote a free or open source SIEM, but it is one of the most widely used and is one of the most capable ones you'll run into. Once you're familiar with Splunk, maybe there might be others that you can pull from to work with, but that's the one I would recommend you start with.
Okay, awesome. And I downloaded the course notes for Security 501, so I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
Thank you. You have a great day.
Thanks for your support, Hassan. Best of luck.
Thanks.
That's fantastic. And what a great lab you're going to have running. I've mentioned this in other study groups, and we'll go back to the phones just a bit. I see you holding callers. Is that when you walk into a meeting, when you walk into an interview, and maybe you don't have direct security knowledge, you don't have that experience of having that job, you have a networking foundation, you've worked with operating systems, but you don't have really a way to sit down and tell somebody about your security experience because you haven't had a security job before in IT security. This is a great way to get some stories, is to load up a firewall, is to install some type of IPS or content filter, and be able to watch the traffic going across your network. How many people are trying to attack devices on your network? Set up a port forward on your router to a server that's on the inside of your network. Make sure that Splunk is monitoring that and see how many people from the outside are trying to attack that device. And then you've got a story when people say, "Tell me about what you've done with security." Like, "Oh, let me tell you about the lab I set up and what I found. This is really interesting." And you can tell them about all of the things you did, and they're going to say, "Oh, you've set up pfSense. Oh, you set up Splunk. Oh, you're monitoring a system. Tell me more." And that's practical experience. I got to tell you, that's good stuff. An employer can build on those things. So that's where that conversation came from. And I think Hassan is on absolutely the right track with that. Let's go back to the phones Hello, 443. Thanks for calling. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Professor. My name's Sean. I'm calling you from Maryland.
Hey,
How you
welcome.
doing?
What can we do for you, Sean?
I've been trying to get my Security Plus because it's kind of like becoming one of the requirements for my job. Even though I've been in the field for a while, that now they're coming back and say, "Oh, now you have to get certified." And CompTIA Security Plus has been the chosen one to say, "Okay, now you're at a level we trust."
Right.
Some of the things I'm going through, I went through a course for college like last year, and it turned out that was the 401. So I was doing 401, then all of a sudden I said, well, I'm going to get some more experience before I take my test. And next thing I know, 401 is no longer there. We got to go to 501.
Right.
It's like, wow. So this is like one of the arguments to say, get your certification as soon as you can. Don't wait on it.
And unfortunately, it's even more critical with this particular update, because if people have been through these updates before, then you probably know that it's somewhere between 25 to 30% of the information is brand new. But from the 401 to the 501, over 60% of the topics on the exam objectives are completely new to the 501. So 40% of what you learned on your 401 class, you can apply towards the 501. You're almost doing another half of an exam study to get up to date with all the 501 materials.
Right. I did see some things actually were simplified. Other things are added that were like, whoa, what's this stuff?
Right. And I think that was a smart move on CompTIA's part. They tried to focus in on the things that are the day-to-day, the important topics you need to know in an IT security role, and get rid of a lot of the trivia that's on the outside. You don't need to know pages and pages and pages of port numbers. You need to know the most important ones. And you're right, they did add a lot of other new topics into the exam. So in some cases, you're simply doing some minor updates. In other cases, all new topics you have to learn from the bottom.
Right. One of the things I have an issue with is trying to get some of the performance-based questions down. Because a lot of the stuff, even like when you say, well, they're not going to ask you what an SLE is. They're going to give you an example and say, you know, what is this thing here? Where could like one go for like some of the experience on that? Would it be like, okay, if you have a Windows server, could you set up like Active Directory and do that? Or if you have a firewall, is one of the performance-based questions going to be here? What setting do you put on a firewall to get this result?
Maybe so. In fact, I think we've done a performance-based question exactly like that in a previous study group, where I give you a scenario, I show you a network diagram, I tell you, here's what the security policy we want to implement. Make a rule in the firewall to implement that policy. So you're on the right track with what those are. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of resources to go to find this information. I am in the process of writing a set of sample exams that I think are pretty close to the style of a CompTIA exam, but they're not an exact duplicate of what CompTIA is doing. But I think it has the same feel, the same flavor that you would find if you were to go to a CompTIA exam. And so I've written probably 15 different performance-based questions for that they're kind of different than what we do on our monthly study group, but in many cases they're actually quite similar. So if you've gone through all of the study groups that we've done for the past year, the first question is always a performance-based question. That would be a good place to reference, because I think I take a sampling of many different styles and I put them into those performance-based questions. There's just not a lot of things out there. Hopefully I'll be able to get those sample questions that I put together done and in the book form that I'm looking for, but that's months from now to have something like that done. There's not a lot of resources. I tell people that if you know the content, you understand what's in the exam objectives, that it doesn't matter how they ask the question, you'll be able to find a way to do it. Because quite honestly, a lot of the performance-based questions from CompTIA, they're matching, they're fill in the blank, or not even fill in the blank for the Security Plus, they're more drag and drop, where they already give you the possibilities and you simply drop them into the right place. So it may not be as hard as a lot of people think. It may be more of just fear of the unknown. And I think the more we get some of these samples out in the course, in the study groups like we did today, I think the more comfortable people will be.
Right. Yeah, that's what I did, because I've actually gone back to your previous videos, and
good.
like when I'm driving in the car, I'll play like the YouTube version. I won't look at it, obviously, I'm driving, but I'm listening to it, and I'm like, you know, selecting, okay, well, that's going to be B, and it's going to be whatever the answer is, and usually it's pretty correct. So even your older 401 videos do have some relevance still.
And you can go back a year now. The 501 came out a year ago. So if you go back a year, you're still dealing with 501 content in my study groups. And I tend to do similar questions a year later. So if you went back to October of last year, you would find that the question I did in October of last year is very similar to the question I did this year. It probably dealt with technologies and descriptions, just like I did this year. But if you go back 12 months, you'll see that all of them are very different in what they're asking and different types of questions. Some of them are you're creating a firewall rule. Some of them you're doing a drag and drop. Some of them are matching. Some of them are putting in a particular order. Some of them are you're given a command prompt and you're having to type things in. So I think that covers the bases of the type of things. The Security Plus exam tends to go into even more detail with performance-based questions. So my recommendation for you is not to get wrapped around the axle too much with the questions themselves. They can be pretty involved when you finally get to the exam. And that's why I really thought maybe I should write a book that has these in there so that you won't be thrown about it when you finally sit down for the exam and you realize, wait, they're not all matching questions. Some of these are really involved questions. I should be prepared for this. And hopefully I can get something out soon that would allow you to prepare.
Good, because I tend to overthink questions a lot. Like the one you had about the SSL accelerator in the chat, or in the questions, it was like, well, wait a minute, a database server could be the client of the web server, can it? So then it would kind of be the same. Oh, but wait a minute, no, that's overthinking it.
Right.
It's wait a minute, what does the question exactly say? No more, no less, bottom line.
Right. And that is exactly the way to look at it. It's very similar to other professional exams that you might run into, where you have to look at the question as its own little world. Here is the only thing you know. Here is the only possible answers associated with it. Don't think about anything else around it. Because the question I gave today on a number of these, you can say, well, wait, I know another way to do that. I can use something other than a keylogger. Yes, you could, but that wasn't one of the answers. You only have to go with what the answers were, and as soon as you start trying to go outside that box, you're going to get wrapped all around the axle. You're absolutely right. Focus on only what they give you. Focus on only the answers you have, and once you're done with that question, completely wipe the slate and start new again.
All right. I like to thank you too. Your slides have some interesting graphics that kind of set up a little reminder of what it is like when you talk about PEAP and you have a little baby chick there because baby chicks go peep. You know,
they do. That's
or
it.
you want to talk logs and you have a cut log of firewood there. That's pretty cool. So setting up little things like that will help you remember things that are relevant to it.
I'm a simple person, and these things amuse me, and it's one of the few ways I'm able to keep myself interested sometimes. So I'm glad it worked. I'm glad that works for you too.
Cool. All right. Thanks a lot, and keep up the good work. Everything's cool, and hopefully I can take my test and pass it soon. So
fantastic. Best of luck, Sean.
I'll let you know. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. That's great. That's whenever I start trying to break down on my videos, that's one of the things I'm trying to do as well. Sometimes people will send me, I know I've gone too far, when people will send me an email and say, why was that on the screen? Why did you use that picture? What were you trying to say? And I know I finally probably took it one step too far whenever it's there. If you're able to decipher what I have on my screen, then you'll be in fine shape to be able to do that. I think that's one of my challenges too, is making sure that I'm able to decipher that myself and make those things happen. That becomes a challenge. Hopefully I can figure out those details when I'm doing it. Like, why did I put a picture of that? Why is that there? Hopefully the peep and the log are pretty obvious. From the chat room, let's do some more of these. At the end of December, I have a 50 quiz test based on CompTIA to get an IT tech job at Amazon. Would it be enough time to learn the CompTIA A+? Well, you've got right now, as we're recording this is October the 24th. You're talking about the end of December. You got 2 months. That's pretty good a 50 quiz test based on, I'm assuming, the A plus, or is it the Security plus? If it's an entry level IT tech job, it's the, oh, you said the A plus. So I think that's I think you got some time there if you really do study. On average, I find most people are studying about 3 months to be able to use this technology, be able to understand the details of what they need to know. Some people are able to do this in 2 weeks. Some people like me take 6 months or a year. It just depends on how good you are with this technology, what your previous experience is, and how much time you spend studying. So can you do it in 2 months? Absolutely. If you really apply yourself, you can absolutely get this done in 2 months and get in there to Amazon and get that entry-level job, because that's really the hardest part. Once you get that entry-level job, now you start meeting people in the industry. Now you start knowing people that are working in your organization. Those people go to other organizations. You meet people at the other organizations, and the cycle begins. You begin hopping around. In IT, we don't tend to have a job for our entire career. We usually start somewhere, maybe move up in the organization, but after 3 to 5 years, many people are off to the next organization. It's just sort of the way things tend to work today. Obviously, those numbers get longer as the economy gets worse, and they get shorter as the economy gets better. So those types of things change depending on where you are in the world, but we don't tend to stay in one place very long. My last job, I stayed in there almost 7 years, which was a long time in the IT world. But it was an up-and-coming company. I started when the company was very small. The company got very large. So that 7 years was just constant motion. That was an amazing experience. So I hope everybody has the chance to go through that kind of thing. It really is remarkable to have that there. Well, there is, what else do we have here and available? We've got plenty to step through. I've got other questions that have come in also. Let's see. What is the next step after Security Plus? There's a good question. We're often worried about how do we get to Security Plus, but what happens after that? IT security, I guess what they're now calling cybersecurity, is a very, very broad term. And I think in many times people don't understand exactly what that term encompasses, or perhaps what it doesn't encompass. Most of the time we say IT security, we're not talking about someone who's doing any programming or application development. And people are asking, so what's the difference between IT security and cybersecurity? I don't know. IT security, I'm securing IT. Cybersecurity, I'm securing cyber, I guess, whatever that is. Cybersecurity, I'll tell you what the difference is. There isn't one. Cybersecurity is a term that was created by marketing professionals in our industry to better describe, to make the IT security sound cooler. That's the only thing that was done. That's why that was there. I want to say, because as someone who in college was a mainframe operator on Control Data's cyber mainframes, I want to say that cybersecurity is someone who is securing Control Data cyber mainframes from the 80s. I don't think that's what it is. It's just a cool name people are using to describe IT security. IT security focuses on securing the infrastructure from attacks and keeping your data safe. So anybody who is managing firewalls, intrusion prevention systems, you're setting up VPN connections between sites, you're implementing some type of client-based VPN, installing maybe some type of multiple access controls within an organization, setting up security for a hospital, setting up security for a transportation organization, everything surrounding a SIEM and consolidating log files, creating reports from that SIEM, creating policies that can be used to support the security of those organizations. That's IT security. Now, you notice nowhere in there did I say programming. Nowhere in there did I say creating applications. That is computer science. It's a completely different world of things, and there's absolutely a huge security and an entire world of security based on application development. We're not talking about that when we talk about cybersecurity or IT security. We're really talking about securing the enterprise and making sure that all of our data remains safe. Are you going to be doing some type of scripting? Do you need to know some type of basic The application scripting? Yes, you do. So you hear people talk about Python. You hear people talking about scripting things in an operating system. That's not programming. That's scripting. And there's a very specific delineation there. Someone who is in cybersecurity is almost never a programmer. Somebody who is in computer science is always the programmer. But when we talk about cybersecurity, that's what we mean from a career perspective, that you're very familiar with the firewall technologies, the IPSs, the intrusion prevention, being able to set up the VPNs, understand how to make security work in your environment. There is a enormous foundation in networking when we talk about IT security. So I come from a network engineering background and IT security that I layered on top of that. So in the chat room, people are asking, I started a career as a network engineer. I'd like to add the security to that. Is that a good idea? That's the best idea. That is the way to do it, by the way. That is the most advantageous to you. And let me give an example why. As a security professional, as IT security, a cybersecurity professional, you will need to be able to implement a firewall. Or you're going to integrate that into some type of virtual wire or bump on the wire at layer 1. Are you going to integrate that as a layer 3 device with routing? Are you going to perform dynamic routing on that layer 3 device? Are you going to implement static routing on that layer 3 device? Are you going to have multiple firewalls in place for redundancy? How are you going to integrate those IP addresses? Is it going to have the same configuration on both firewalls in an active standby, or is it going to be active-active? How do you implement an active-active configuration with your current IP addressing scheme and WAN connectivity that you have in place? So already, almost everything we've talked about implementing a firewall and having it on your network in a redundant form, notice I didn't ask any security questions. We aren't even at the security part yet. We're still at the networking part, just trying to get this thing installed. Unless you have that foundation in networking, you're never going to be able to make that happen. You're never going to be able to properly engineer this. So the same thing applies to intrusion prevention. The same thing applies to IPsec connectivity, which is almost always routed onto another subnet. Usually there's network address translation involved. So you have to understand how to implement and how all of those things are engineered. If you're doing and that same type of network inside of your organization, you're setting up a SIEM, then you're going to need to be able to work with the operating system associated with that SIEM, whether it's Windows or Linux. You're going to need to install that into a VM somewhere. So there's an IP address associated with that. How do you get all of the other devices to communicate to that device? If they're from a different site or a third party, probably going to need to NAT that traffic and send it through. That's all networking. Again, all of that I just mentioned is all networking. So when I tell people, get the foundation in networking, if you're planning to get into security, learn networking, become an expert in networking, know everything there is to know about layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, and then a little bit of everything else on top of that. And once you have that solid foundation, you can then start applying that into these security roles. And I think that's one of the best things that you can do if you're planning to get into security, because there are not a lot of great security roles for entry level. Most security roles are for someone who is moving from networking into security, because that's the type of skill set you're going to need to really, really, really make security work for you. I don't know how you do it otherwise. I'm not sure how you would make security and all of those things work unless you had that existing knowledge in networking. Just doesn't make sense for that. So that's why I say, make sure you have those things there and understand what you're able to do from that perspective. I think that's the focus. So thank you for asking again what I think the next step after security is, because that was the original question. So now that you've got this foundation in security, now where do you go? Usually after Security Plus, you've got some type of focus you want to focus on. Maybe you want to become extremely knowledgeable in a particular firewall technology. Maybe you want to focus more on, some people like performing penetration tests, although I will tell you a very, very small percentage of jobs in IT security have anything to do with penetration testing. There's obviously, that's very different than what you see online. Online, it seems like the only job you will ever get in IT security is pen testing. And when in reality, it's just a small little slice of what's available out there. You'll probably do some type of penetration testing in your normal job as an IT security professional. There aren't, relatively speaking, in security, not a lot of 100% pen testing jobs out there. There are some. I'm not saying there aren't any. Of course, there are penetration testing jobs out there. There just seems to be an overabundance of emphasis on pen testing online and with certifications that I don't know where that's coming from, because the jobs aren't out there to support that. There's many, many, many more jobs and a huge number increase in jobs doing all of the other things I just mentioned. So after Security Plus, maybe you go through the process of focusing more on a niche, focus on knowing everything there is to know about the SIEM, focus on everything there is to know about a particular firewall technology, focus on everything there is to know about endpoint protection. Those are the things where people usually make their next step. And it's usually a more specific and focused. Maybe you go to Palo Alto Networks and get their performance and certification, engineering certification. Maybe you go to Checkpoint. Maybe you go Cisco's security. It depends on what particular technology you're using in your organization very often. But once you know that one, you can apply a lot of the same knowledge across the board. There's obviously unique pieces with all of those. If there's a SIEM, you learn everything there is to know about that SIEM. If you're someone who's implementing some type of VPN technology, you become extremely knowledgeable in that VPN technology. So that's where it comes from. So that's why we mention those things. Cross-site scripting, SQL injection attack. You need a knowledge of computer programming, right? No. Why would I need to know computer programming to be able to stop a SQL injection attack? I need to know what a SQL injection attack is. I need to at least have some idea of this technology, but you're not going to be looking through packets and go, whoa, I just found a SQL injection in this packet. No, that's not the way it works. You have an intrusion prevention system that fires off a message that says, I have identified a SQL injection, and then it's up to you to see if that's real. Is that a false positive, or was it really a SQL injection? Let's see the packets it captured, and let me look through this one packet it captured to see if that really was a SQL injection. And it's very easy. By looking through that, you can look for very key things that are in there that require almost no knowledge of SQL, by the way, and certainly no knowledge of programming, zero knowledge of computer programming. So people will tell you in IT security, you need to know C++, and you need to no, you don't. No. That's it. It's nice to have that knowledge, but almost nobody in IT security has time to do any type of programming. There's just no time at all to be able to have that there. So things like input validation, determining and checking on false positives don't require any programming knowledge at all. And that it confuses me as well when I look around at a college or university that's offering a cybersecurity degree, and half of the degree is you learning all of these different programming languages, and I don't get that because we don't use those in IT security. We don't have time. There's no time to do programming. There's time to do scripting. There's time to set up some scripts in Python. That's useful. Time to understand Perl, because that's extremely functional on the Linux side. Understand PowerShell, extremely functional on the Windows side. That's not programming. That's scripting. Very good knowledge though to have those. So once you set up your lab, do some PowerShell, do some Perl, do some Python. That's plenty. You know that. You're even well above what most IT security professionals are doing once you have a solid knowledge of that by itself. As soon as you get to a point where you need to create an application that performs a particular function, you grab the network, you grab the programming guy, you bring him in, you sit him down and say, here's what we need. That's the extent of programming that you need to know. You need to know who to call. There's your programming knowledge. The rest of that, you'll never need. You will not have time to do that and make any of those things happen. It just does it. It's all about time. There's obviously a push these days to sort of blend some of these things together. Businesses think it would be great if they could have someone knowledgeable in networking, knowledgeable in security, and knowledgeable in programming, and blend that all together into a single human being who can do anything. I think that's a great idea, You will never find that. That is a rare, rare thing. That person would cost you so much money as an employee, and ultimately, not all of those things are going to be as good as what you want. Because if you're spending time knowing everything there is to know about networking, everything there is to know about security, and everything to know about programming, one of those is not going to get everything. One of those is going to be not as good as the others. Maybe two of those are going to be not as good as the others. It just doesn't work as the way people would hope. Is it a great idea? Absolutely. Wouldn't it be awesome? And then there could be rainbows, and we could have unicorns, and everybody would get candy. It would just be awesome. I think that would be great. Let's do that. It's not going to happen. Then we wake up, and then we have to go to work. It's usually how it breaks down. So that's my encouragement to give you as we end this study group, is to focus on IT security. Don't get anybody else telling you to do all of these other things that have nothing to do with security. Focus on the security piece. Get your networking foundation. You're going to be fine. You will be able to do all of those things and so much more. It's remarkable the opportunity that is out there in IT security these days. It is available and waiting for you. So spend some time on that networking piece. Get your foundations of operating systems. Learn as you go. Always be learning something. There should never be a time where you're not reading or learning or having some type of new knowledge in your head. Always have that and keep it moving forward, and everything else will take care of itself, I promise you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us in the first hour. Thank you for being here in the second hour. We do one of these every month. Check back in at professormesser.com/calendar. We'd love to have you on the next study group as well. And thank you for being here. We will see you next time on the Security Plus study group. Thanks, everyone.